As you know, this channel is primarily dedicated to covering Formula 1, but a few weeks ago I published a video called Beyond F1, and I made that because I wanted to share other motorsports with you that in some instances give way more excitement than Formula 1 and a lot of times are way more accessible as well. I'll link that video below if you want to check it out. Over the Easter weekend, I actually went to the British GT Championship at Oulton Park here in the UK in Cheshire. I just wanted to share the experience with you and talk about how these sorts of weekends are not only a fantastic way to get up close with some of these brilliant cars, and if you already love racing, that in itself is fantastic, but it's also a great way to get into motorsport and maybe even see if you enjoy it, with plenty to do in and around the track. The action itself started on the Friday with testing, and then Saturday, that's when the main session started, with a day off on Easter Sunday, and the main event took place on Monday. There was a full schedule from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 PM in the evening. British GT was the main attraction, and that had the qualifying on the Saturday with 2 one-hour races on the Monday. There's plenty of other support races as well. You had the Ginetta GT Juniors, the Ginetta GT Academy, and the Ginetta GT Championship. They were all in attendance, as well as GB3 and GB4. Honestly, it was fantastic. All of the cars sounded brilliant. The British GT cars especially. I'll play some footage in a second without me speaking so you can hear it, but the Mercedes AMG and the Aston Martin Vantage especially sound so gritty, and the video just can't do it justice of how good they sound. Listen to this. Before we talk too much about the GT3 cars, I think it's important to talk about the other support races. The GB3 cars were fantastic. They were little pocket rockets. They have around 250 brake horsepower, and they feature a side air intake and carbon airbox, similar to the earlier generation of Formula 3 cars. That's how you can tell them apart from their little brother, the GB4 cars, which don't have that side intake. The GB4 cars have less power, and they're actually available for around about 25,000 British pounds. But 80% of the same spares can be used between GB3 and GB4, meaning teams can run cars in both championships fairly easily. I'll just let this video play of the GB3 cars starting up and heading out onto track on the Friday. The Ginetta series, on the other hand, is a fantastic entry point for drivers into GT racing, with 3 series taking place. The junior category is for ages of 14 to 17, and even though I know racing drivers start young these days, I was just so surprised to see how young the drivers actually were walking around the paddock. GT Academy is more of a stepping stone or entry level into GT racing for experienced drivers and also rookies. Then you have the main championship with the larger and more powerful cars and the far more experienced drivers. There are a lot of pluses to the Ginetta cars, mainly the fact that the racing is so good, but also it's a spec series, so you know you're racing against drivers in equal machinery. With these sorts of racing weekends, one of the huge pluses is just how much access you have. There is the main pit lane, where the British GT cars are held in their garages, but in the paddock behind you have all of the prep areas for all of the other series that is fully accessible to the public, and you could just walk around and get up close to the cars, see them being worked on, repaired. It's a bit of a nightmare for the teams sometimes trying to navigate their cars back to their areas as the public are all walking around trying to get their pictures and video. I was one of those people. There was also a free pit walk where the British GT drivers were doing signings in their garages but as you can imagine, it was incredibly busy. Speaking of the British GT, those cars are something else. The championship is comprised of both GT3 cars and GT4 cars, which are both incredible. You can tell the difference though, as the aero on the GT4 cars is far more reserved. The new Mustang GT4 was racing and it sounded amazing. Listen to this supercharger. The GT3 field is pretty stacked with incredible cars. BMW M4, Aston Martin Vantage, McLaren 720S, Audi R8, Lamborghini Huracan, Mercedes AMG. Lovely looking cars that you just get that sound and feel from. That's one big takeaway when you experience the racing up close. You can hear the brake squeal, you can hear the throttle inputs, the contact feel more impactful, the smell of the engines, the rubber. It's obviously a very different experience to watching at home. Let's just talk quickly about Oulton Park as well. It's really not the best circuit for overtaking, if we're being honest. There are some spots, especially into the chicane, but the delta needs to be pretty big to make it work. It's a great track to see the cars lapping around though. And on the Saturday we had a great spot in the grandstand at Knickerbrook, which meant you could see the cars on the run down to Cascades and the entry into the chicane. We had a nightmare on the Monday getting into the circuit, spent hours in gridlock, but that was blamed on the weather as it was extremely wet that day. Lots of cars were getting stuck on the fields, and as such, most of the races on Monday morning and early afternoon started behind the safety car. It did clear up later in the day though. It was good to see some of the cars in both dry and wet conditions. Sadly, both British GT races were heavily hampered by full course yellows, so in truth, we didn't get to see that much racing in those 1 hour races. The circuit has some great spots to watch, even when you're not in the grandstands, and the majority of people take chairs and camping stuff with them and just get into the best position early on. In fact, if you go into the entrance at Knickerbrook with your car, you can actually park overlooking the back straight. Obviously, you'd have to be there very early to get one of those positions, but it is possible. Interestingly as well, there's no grandstand at the start-finish straight, and that is where you would normally imagine a grandstand to be for the start of the races. So you can easily wander over there, head up to the bank, and just watch the start of the race without needing to pay extra for a grandstand ticket. A standard weekend ticket cost £35 at Oulton Park, and a grandstand ticket for the Saturday was an extra £10. If you buy it in advance, that is. If you pay for it on the day, it's more expensive. If you get the chance to go down to your local circuit, do it. Watch something like British GT or Classic Racing, which I've also done at Oulton Park, or maybe British Touring Cars. You'll enjoy it.